Elara Vance believed her life had been pared down to its essential, unchangeable facts. She was 28, a respectable spinster. She was the daughter of a gentleman who had possessed more charm than sense, a fact proven by the mountain of debt he had left behind. And she was, by necessity, a professional woman of unimpeachable discretion, a quality that had become her only real currency. For 6 years, she had served as a companion, a secretary, a manager of chaotic households for ladies of quality who needed a mind sharper than their own. Her present employment was with the Dowager Viscountess Crestwood, a woman whose primary concerns were the persistent damp in the West Wing and the impertinence of her new footman. Elara's days were a quiet hum of ledgers, letters, and lists. Her world was ordered, predictable, and painted in shades of grey. Hope felt like a phantom limb, an ache for something that had been amputated long ago by practicality. She expected to grow old in service, a silent, efficient ghost in other people's houses, her existence noted only when a schedule was flawlessly executed or a difficult letter was diplomatically penned. She did not expect a summons, delivered by a man whose livery was so crisp and dark, it seemed to absorb the very light in the Dowager's dreary morning room. The seal on the thick vellum was that of the Duke of Blackwood. A man spoken of in whispers, a figure of immense wealth and staggering solitude. He was a creature of myth in London society, seen so rarely that his existence was confirmed only by the undiminished power of his name. The summons was not an invitation. It was a command, albeit a polite one, requesting her presence at his London residence on a matter of professional urgency. The Dowager Viscountess had been flustered, intrigued, and ultimately cowed into releasing Elara for the afternoon. Blackwood House was a fortress of granite and silence, on a square that otherwise bustled with life. The air inside was still and cool, smelling faintly of beeswax and something else, old paper perhaps and cedar. It was the scent of a library, a scent of thoughts left undisturbed for centuries. Elara was not led to a frivolous drawing room but to a severe, masculine study where the Duke himself stood waiting, framed by shelves that climbed to a ceiling lost in shadow. Alistair Beaumont, the Duke of Blackwood, was not the brooding monster of gossip. He was simply still, a man who seemed to have mastered the art of taking up no more space than his body required. He was tall and dressed in immaculate understated black, his dark brown hair showing no sign of powder. His face was composed, his features clear-cut, but it was his complete lack of social flourish that was most unsettling. He did not smile. He did not offer pleasantries. He watched her approach his desk with an unnerving, analytical calm. His eyes were the color of polished mahogany, and they missed nothing. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice a low baritone that seemed perfectly suited to the quiet room. "Thank you for your promptness. Please, be seated." She sat, her back straight, her hands folded over her modest reticule. She was an employee, here for a business matter. She would conduct herself as such. The Duke did not sit. He remained standing, one hand resting on a stack of books on his desk. "I have a proposition for you. It is of a sensitive and unconventional nature. I have been assured of your discretion. Your Grace may rely upon it," Elara said, her own voice steady. "I require a wife," he stated, with the same inflection he might have used to say, "I require a new set of curtains." The words were so blunt, so devoid of romance or sentiment, that they hung in the air between them, stark and strange. I have neither the time nor the inclination to engage in the tedious rituals of courtship. The entire process strikes me as inefficient and predicated on falsehoods. I do not wish to participate. Elara waited. Surely there was more. However, he continued, his gaze unwavering, "The succession requires an heir. My duties require a duchess. Therefore, a wife must be procured. I wish to hire you to manage this process for me." Of all the things she had expected, this was not among them. A tremor of disbelief, sharp and unsettling, ran through her. "Your Grace, you wish to hire me to find you a bride?" "Precisely," he confirmed. "You will vet the suitable candidates of the season. You will compile a list of their attributes, their connections, their temperaments. You will arrange brief, formal interviews here, in this house. I will make my selection based on your findings and my own brief assessment. You will be compensated for your time and your silence. The sum will be significant enough to ensure both." He named a figure that made the breath catch in her throat. It was a sum that could not only clear her family's remaining debts, but grant her independence for the rest of her life. It was madness, a cold, transactional approach to the most personal of unions. Yet, it was also a lifeline, a way out of the endless grey corridor of her future. I am not a matchmaker, Your Grace. I am not seeking a matchmaker." He countered smoothly. "I am seeking an administrator, an assessor of facts. I am told you excel at such things." He had done his research. The thought was both flattering and chilling. He was treating his own marriage as he would a business acquisition. She should have refused. It was improper, bizarre, and flew in the face of every societal convention. But the sum he offered was not just money. It was freedom. The freedom to have a small cottage of her own, to never again have to curtsy to a woman like the Viscountess Crestwood. "I accept the commission, Your Grace," she heard herself say, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. And so her strange new life began. She was given a small, private office in Blackwood House, a room as quiet and severe as its master. She spent her days poring over lists from Burke's peerage, making discreet inquiries, and composing polite, formal invitations. She was no longer Elara Vance, companion, she was a functionary, the chief architect of the search for the next Duchess of Blackwood. She had interviewed 14 women on his behalf. He had rejected all of them by noon. The process was brutally efficient. Each young lady, accompanied by her watchful mother, was shown into a formal sitting room. Elara would conduct a brief, preliminary conversation before the Duke himself would enter. He would stay for no more than 10 minutes, ask a few pointed questions, and then depart with a stiff formal bow. The moment the door closed behind the departing guests, he would return to the small antechamber where Elara sat with her ledger. "No," he would say. And he would provide a reason. Lady Annalise Finch was dismissed because her laugh was, he claimed, like the squeaking of a poorly oiled hinge. Miss Eleanor Croft was rejected because she had used the word charming 17 times in 10 minutes. The Honourable Beatrice Shaw was unsuitable because her silence was not thoughtful, but vacant. The reasons grew more and more esoteric. Lady Catherine's posture was too rigid. Miss Willoughby's French was too perfect, suggesting affectation. His rejections were delivered with a finality as soft and absolute as dust settling on a forgotten portrait. Elara would dutifully note the reason in her ledger, a thick, leather-bound book that was rapidly becoming a catalogue of failed duchesses. But as the days turned into a week, a suspicion began to bloom in her mind, a tiny, unwelcome weed. The reasons he gave felt thin. They were excuses, not assessments. He never looked at the candidates for long. His gaze, she began to realize, was most often on her. He would watch her as she took her notes, his mahogany eyes focused on the movement of her quill across the page. He listened to her questions more intently than he listened to their answers. He seemed to be judging the entire performance, not on the merits of the young women, but on her handling of them. After the 14th rejection, that of the perfectly amiable Miss Isabel Goddard, "She smells of lilies. I find it oppressive." Elara finally closed her ledger with a soft snap. The sound was unnaturally loud in the silent room. "Your Grace," she began, her tone carefully neutral. At this rate, we will exhaust the list of all eligible ladies in London before the month is out. Perhaps if you could provide me with a more precise set of criteria, it would streamline the process." He was standing by the window, looking out at the manicured garden, though she doubted he saw it. "My criteria remain the same: a woman of good breeding, sound temperament, and intelligence. All of the ladies presented thus far have met those criteria," she pointed out, a hint of frustration coloring her voice. "Miss Goddard is fluent in 3 languages and is celebrated for her kindness. And the lilies," he added, turning to face her. There was no mockery in his expression, only a quiet statement of fact. For a moment she felt a dizzying sense of absurdity. They were discussing the future of one of the greatest dukedoms in England, and the decision hinged on floral perfumes. "Perhaps the issue is not with the candidates," she ventured, her heart beginning to beat a little faster. It was a risk, challenging him. "Perhaps you have no intention of choosing anyone at all." His expression did not change, but a new stillness came over him, the stillness of a predator that has just heard a twig snap. "An interesting hypothesis, Miss Vance. And if that were true, what would you surmise is my purpose in this elaborate charade?" He was asking for her professional opinion. She would give it to him. "I would surmise that this exercise serves some other purpose. A delay tactic, perhaps. A way to satisfy the demands of your advisors or family that you seek a wife, without any actual intention of doing so." He considered this. His head tilted slightly. "Plausible. And your recommendation? As my consultant in this matter." "My recommendation, Your Grace," she said, her voice crisp, "would be to terminate my employment and inform your advisors that the search proved fruitless. It would be far more efficient." A long silence stretched between them. She could hear the ticking of the grand clock in the hall, each second marking her audacity. She had, in essence, accused him of wasting her time and his own money. "Your efficiency is precisely why I hired you," he said at last, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "Very well, Miss Vance. Let us refine the criteria. Tomorrow, you will present me with candidates who do not laugh like hinges, who have a vocabulary beyond charming, and who do not smell of lilies." He turned and left the room, leaving her with the distinct and unsettling impression that she had just lost a game she hadn't even known she was playing. The next day she presented 3 new candidates, chosen with painstaking care. He rejected them all before luncheon. One spoke too loudly. One spoke too softly. The third had, he declared, unkind eyes. Elara felt a simmering anger begin to replace her professional detachment. He was making a fool of her. The commission, which had once seemed a miraculous escape, now felt like a gilded cage, and he was the inscrutable keeper rattling the bars. She began to notice other things, small details that did not fit the picture of a cold, unfeeling duke. He always ensured that a fresh pot of her preferred tea was waiting in her office each morning. When she was working late, a light supper would appear on a tray, left by a silent footman. One afternoon, as she was interviewing the mother of a prospective bride, the woman, Lady Danbury, made a condescending remark. "It must be so interesting for you, Miss Vance," she had said with a saccharine smile, "to have a glimpse into a world so far beyond your own." Before Elara could formulate a polite, cutting reply, the Duke had entered the room. He hadn't appeared to have heard, but his next words were delivered with a chill that frosted the air. "Lady Danbury," he said, his voice quiet but carrying immense weight. "Thank you for your time. Your daughter will not be required for an interview. The position has been filled." It was a lie, a blatant one, but it was delivered with such authority that the woman could only stammer and retreat. He had dismissed her daughter not as a candidate, but as a person unworthy of consideration. He had defended Elara's dignity. The incident left her deeply unsettled. It was an act of protection, and it was entirely personal. It had nothing to do with her professional duties. Her carefully constructed walls of propriety and distance began to develop hairline cracks. She started to see the man behind the title. The lonely figure in the vast, silent house. The way his hand would sometimes hover over a particular worn leather-bound book on his desk as if for comfort. It was a volume of Greek poetry, she saw one day, left open to a page. He began to ask her opinion on matters far outside the scope of her commission. He asked her thoughts on a new agricultural bill, on a collection of Roman coins he was thinking of acquiring, on the replanting of the estate's rose garden. Their conversations drifted from the business of finding a wife to discussions of history, philosophy, and art. In these moments, the cold, analytical Duke would vanish, replaced by a man of deep intelligence and a dry, surprising wit. Elara found herself looking forward to their daily debriefings, to the verbal chess matches, and the unexpected moments of intellectual connection. She was more herself with this impossible, reclusive man than she had been with anyone in her entire life. And that realization terrified her. She was an employee. He was a duke. The chasm between them was absolute and uncrossable. The breaking point came during the third week. She had found the perfect candidate. Lady Jane Sterling was beautiful, intelligent, impeccably bred, and possessed a quiet grace that Elara herself admired. She did not giggle, she was not vacuous, and she smelled faintly and pleasantly of soap and fresh air. She was, by any rational measure, the ideal Duchess of Blackwood. The Duke spoke with her for a full 15 minutes, an unprecedented length of time. Elara watched them from the antechamber, a strange, tight knot forming in her stomach. This was it. This was the success she was being paid to achieve. This was the end of her time the thought should have brought relief. Instead, it felt like a sentence. When Lady Jane and her mother had departed, radiating quiet confidence, the Duke walked back into the antechamber. He stood before Elara's desk, his face unreadable. "Well?" Elara asked, her quill poised over the ledger. Her hand was not quite steady. "She is. Suitable," he conceded. Elara's breath hitched. "So, you will make an offer?" "No," he said. The single word dropped into the silence between them. Elara stared at him, her professional composure finally shattering. "No? Your Grace, on what grounds?" "She is perfect. There is not a single flaw you could possibly invent." "That is the flaw," he said, his voice low. "She is perfect, and I found the entire conversation with her an intolerable bore." That was when Elara Vance finally broke. She stood up, her hands flat on the desk, the ledger of failures lying open between them. "Then there is no one," she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of fury and a despair she did not understand. "There is no woman in all of England who will meet your standards, because your standards are a fantasy. This entire endeavor is a farce, and I will no longer be a party to it. I resign my position, Your Grace." She expected him to be angry, to dismiss her coldly. Instead, he looked, relieved. The tension that always seemed to reside in his shoulders seemed to dissipate. Finally, he breathed, the word a soft exhalation of relief. Elara stared at him, utterly bewildered. "Finally. I was beginning to wonder how long it would take you," he said. He walked around the desk until he was standing beside her. He was so close she could smell that faint, familiar scent of paper and cedar, a scent she now inexplicably associated with safety. "Miss Vance, Elara, do you truly not understand?" He reached out, not to touch her, but to gently close the ledger on her desk. The finality of the act was a statement in itself. "I have no interest in Lady Jane Sterling, or any of the others. I have only ever been interested in the opinion of the woman conducting the interviews." The truth landed in her mind not like a thunderclap, but like a key turning in a lock she never knew existed. The rejections, the questions about philosophy, the tea, the defense against Lady Danbury. It was a mosaic, and she had been staring at the individual tiles, never seeing the whole picture. You hired me, so that you could. She couldn't finish the sentence. It was too impossible. So that I could spend time with you, he finished for her, his voice quiet and achingly sincere. I am not a man for ballrooms or flirtatious banter, Miss Vance. I do not know how to court a woman. I saw you once, a year ago, at a charity bazaar. You were managing a crisis with a collapsed stall, surrounded by hysterical ladies. And you were an island of perfect, calm competence. You were intelligent, you were graceful, and you were the most captivating woman I had ever seen. I made inquiries. I learned of your circumstances. And I devised the only plan a man like me could conceive of. A professional arrangement. It was the only way I could think of to have you here, to talk with you, without causing a ruinous scandal. He looked at her, and for the first time she saw not the Duke of Blackwood, but Alistair Beaumont, a man who was lonely and awkward, and had concocted the most elaborate, insane, and strangely romantic scheme she had ever heard of. He was completely vulnerable, his mahogany eyes holding a question he did not dare to ask aloud. He had laid his heart, his reputation, and his foolish plan at her feet. He had given her all the power. She looked down at the closed ledger. It represented her duty, her professionalism, her safe, grey world. For weeks she had clung to it as a shield. It was the barrier that defined her as the employee and him as the Duke. To set it aside was to step into a world without maps, a world of terrifying possibility. This was her decisive act, her choice. He had confessed, but he had not presumed. He waited for her answer. Slowly, deliberately, Elara pushed the ledger away from her, sliding it to the far edge of the desk. She lifted her gaze to meet his, her heart hammering against her ribs not with fear, but with a wild, burgeoning hope. Your Grace, she said, her voice clear and steady. My final report is this. After a thorough and exhaustive search, I have concluded that there is only one suitable candidate for the position of Duchess of Blackwood. His breath caught. And her name? He whispered. Her name, Elara said, a slow smile spreading across her face for the first time in his presence, is not on any of my lists. You have been interviewing the wrong women all along. A look of profound, staggering relief washed over his features. The still, composed Duke vanished completely, replaced by a man seeing the dawn after a long, dark night. He reached for her hand, his fingers closing over hers on the polished wood of the desk. His touch was warm and firm and real. It was not the touch of a duke to his secretary. It was the touch of a man to the woman he had chosen, against all logic and convention. The catharsis was not in a kiss, but in that silent, momentous contact. In the shared understanding that the interviews were, at long last, finally over. 6 months later, Elara, now the Duchess of Blackwood, sat in the library that had once so intimidated her. It was no longer a fortress of silence, but a haven of shared peace. A fire crackled in the grate, casting a warm golden glow over the endless shelves of books. Alistair sat in the armchair opposite her, not reading, but simply watching her with an expression of quiet contentment that still made her heart ache with a gentle joy. Society had been scandalized, then intrigued, and finally, accepting, the story of the reclusive Duke and his spinster secretary had become a legend of the season, a testament to a most unconventional romance. They cared little for the gossip. Their world was here, within these walls, a world they had built together out of a ridiculous business proposition. She had brought a quiet order to his life, and he had brought her a love she never believed she would experience. He was still a man of few words, but she had learned to read the language of his silences, of the small gestures that spoke volumes more than any flowery poetry could. He still brought her tea in the mornings, and she still helped him organize his correspondence, but now they were partners in every sense of the word. He reached across the space between them, his hand covering hers where it rested on the arm of her chair. "Are you happy, Alara?" he asked, the question he still posed, in some form, nearly every day. She looked around the beautiful room, at the man who had seen her worth when she believed she had none, and her heart was so full it felt as if it might burst. The grey, ordered world she had once inhabited was a distant memory. Her life now was full of warmth and colour, and the faint, beloved scent of old paper and cedar. "Alistair," she said softly, her fingers lacing with his. "My professional assessment is that I could not be happier." True worth, she had learned, was not something granted by society or by title. It was something you found in the quiet, steady gaze of the one person who had been looking for you all along.